Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, we have been having a pretty steady diet of World War I over the last few weeks on the channel, especially with my visit to France. But I want to diverge from that just a little bit. We've got the first episode of my visit to France coming Wednesday. That'll be going live as a premiere at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you are around and online at that time, I will be there in the chat to join you as we all watch it together. So hope you can do that. If not, watch it when you can. But I thought it would be nice to just get away from the heaviness of that topic. I've been doing a lot of editing and it's a lot. And the heaviness of just war in general for a day. So we're going to go revisit our friend Mr. Beat on his channel and take a look at his comparison of Alaska and Hawaii. Just a quick note that Mr. Beat and I have a collaboration coming in a few weeks. President's Day, we are going to be doing a live stream where we do a joint tier ranking of U.S. presidents and debate that a little bit. We're still working out the details. We're going to be talking some more between now and then to get everything ironed out, but that's the plan. So more details will come about that. In the meantime, definitely check out his channel. He's a great guy, and he's got a lot of really good stuff. He knows what he's talking about. I'll put a link in the description to this particular video. So let's go ahead and dive in.
This video is sponsored in part by CuriosityStream, Alaska and Hawaii, or the Last Frontier and the Aloha State, the two states that don't border another state in these United States. Both the last two states to join the Union, both have a really high cost of living. This is because not only are the two desirable states to live in, but they are so isolated, so far from most other places where most things are produced. The high cost of shipping causes everything in both states to be much more expensive. That said, Alaska has a lower cost of living.
So, yeah, I've had the privilege of being in both of these states at one time. My wife and I took our honeymoon to Hawaii. We visited the island of Kauai and Oahu, which is where Honolulu is, where the vast majority of people live. That's where Pearl Harbor is, things like that. I was in Alaska. My brother lives in Anchorage, and so that's down here. And but I was actually there. I had a layover in Anchorage, so I got to spend some time with my brother, but then went to Bethel, which was my final destination. Bethel's over in here. And boy, absolutely right. I mean, Bethel, first of all, is a town of like 5,000 people that is completely cut off from the world. Like, you can't drive there from other big towns. The high school that I was speaking at in Bethel, they flew to their basketball games. Like, to go to another school to play them in basketball, you had to fly there. You had to fly to get anywhere. When I was there, I got my rental car, and the town's built around this lake. And so the airport was on the south side, and the hotel, which was actually just a house that was converted into a hotel, was on the north side. And I asked him, I said, should I go around this way to get to the hotel, or should I go around the lake this way to get to the hotel? And the guy said, well, most people just drive over the lake. I said, no, I'll go around. Thank you very much. But that time of year it was 3 hours of sunlight when I was there. I was there in January of that year. Sun came up at 9:30. It was gone by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But yeah, what he's saying about the cost of living, holy cow, did I see that in a big way when I was in Bethel. A 6-inch sub from Subway and a bag of chips and a drink, which here in the U.S. would probably cost me, or here in Ohio would cost me like maybe $7, $8, was like $24 in Bethel. Because, yeah, I mean, not only is it way out of there, but Bethel's way out of the way in Alaska, and everything has to be flown there. So, oh man, it's so expensive in some of those remote parts of Alaska.
Compared to Hawaii. Perhaps because of the high cost of living, both states are slowly losing residents. Both are dominated by their largest cities, Anchorage in Alaska and Honolulu in Hawaii.
Honolulu?
Around half of all Alaskan residents live in the Anchorage metropolitan area, and more than 2/3 of all of Hawaii's residents live in the Honolulu metropolitan area.
So that was Waikiki Beach he was showing right there. Actually, my wife and I, when we had our hotel, we stayed right in there. That's Diamond Head. It's a famous landmark in Honolulu. The other thing about Alaska with all that is Anchorage. Think of all the like mental pictures you have of Alaska, Anchorage really isn't that. Anchorage is way down in the southern part of Alaska. In the summer, I mean, they get in the 70s quite a bit. It's much more probably connected to the Pacific Northwest than it is to the rest of Alaska. It's not, the huge mountains and the snow everywhere and polar bears and that kind of stuff in Anchorage, though there are some moose occasionally. But the thing about the cost of living, too, is that the amount of money you make from jobs goes up to connect, to kind of handle that cost of living. My sister-in-law, one of the reasons they were able to move out there is she got her nursing degree, and she got paid, significantly more. I want to say it's like twice as much as she could have gotten paid for the same job here. So you make money to compensate for the much higher cost of living.
2/3 of all of Hawaii's residents live in the Honolulu metropolitan area. Both have dramatically diverse and beautiful natural scenery, and both have dramatically diverse rainfall patterns. It's kind of crazy, actually. Okay, so in southeast Alaska and the coastal mountain ranges there, they can often get more than 200 inches of precipitation a year.
Which, again, is why I was kind of comparing that part of Alaska where Anchorage is to the Pacific Northwest, where we think of them getting a lot of rain.
While just south of the Alaska range, they get about 60 inches a year, 12 inches a year in the interior, and less than 6 inches a year in the North Slope. In Hawaii, it's just as crazy. Around the summit of Mauna Kea, it gets about 8 inches a year, but down near Big Bog on the windward slope of Haleakala, Maui, they can get up to 404 inches a year.
Now, I think, I could be wrong about this, but so this is the island here this is the island of Oahu. Pearl Harbor is right there, that little kind of inlet that you see, and Honolulu is right there by Pearl Harbor. This is the island of Kauai right here. The inner part of Kauai is all like rainforest, and I want to say that's the rainiest spot on Earth. But on the coast, it doesn't rain at all. And Kauai's not that big of an island. It takes like an hour to drive from one end up to the other, and that's where my wife and I spent most of our honeymoon. The interior of Kauai is like where they shot Jurassic Park and a lot of other films, because it has that very rainforesty look. But now I kind of want to look this up because I'm not sure. Okay, so the 10 wettest places in the world, the top 2 are actually in India. These are by millimeters. And then you have Colombia, then a spot in New Zealand, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon in Africa, and then Maui, the place he was talking about right there, is slightly higher than the spot in Kauai that I was thinking of. So, Mr. Beat, good job. One of the wettest spots on Earth is on Maui. I did not know that. Very cool.
Whoa-ness. Both have lots of islands. Well, Hawaii is just islands. There are 8 main islands, but 137 in total. Alaska has 2,670 islands total. Here they all are.
Oh, man.
Did you read that? Wow, you're good. The most well-known of these are the Aleutian Islands, which shoot out into the northern Pacific Ocean, way past the 180th meridian. Some of those islands should technically be part of tomorrow, since they are west of the international date line. The one furthest out that is part of Alaska, Attu, is the largest uninhabited island in the country and 1,500 miles from Anchorage.
Jeez.
It's about 15 times the size of Manhattan Island, but no one lives there because the weather sucks so bad. Most fun fact ever, Attu is both the United States' westernmost and easternmost point. Anyway, the Aleutian Islands form the northernmost part of the Ring of Fire, an area where lots of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions tend to occur. And yep, there are 57 volcanoes on those islands.
Which is cool because that then compares it to Hawaii, which are volcanic islands. So that's something that's definitely in common.
2,433 miles or 3,916 kilometers separate them from Hawaii. And yep, both Hawaii and Alaska have to worry about volcanoes. Heck, Hawaii only exists because of volcanoes. Lava rising from the ocean floor over millions of years created them. The Big Island, which is only 300,000 years old, is still getting bigger due to the Kilauea volcano continuously erupting. Both also have to worry about earthquakes, although Alaska more so.
Alaska, he's probably about to mention it, had one of the strongest earthquakes in recorded history.
powerful
in the
earthquake in
60s.
North American history happened in Alaska. The Good Friday earthquake, which happened on March 27th, 1964, lasted 4 minutes and 38 seconds and destroyed towns across south central Alaska.
You imagine if an earthquake of that magnitude, I want to say it was close to 9.0 or so on the Richter scale, if that had hit a more populated region than Alaska.
Ultimately killing 131 people. Look at that picture.
Jeez.
Yeah. That happened in Anchorage. It caused the land to literally rise several meters in many areas and caused tsunamis that reached as far away as, you guessed it, Hawaii. Residents of both speak a lot of different languages. Hawaii has 2 official languages, English and Hawaiian, although many there also speak Hawaiian Pidgin, an English-based Creole language. But that's about all the 2 states have in common. Before I get into the differences, did you know there's a wonderful place on the internet where there is nothing but fascinating educational content?
Curiosity
That'd be
Stream.
Curiosity Stream. It's smart TV for your smart TV. Ha ha ha! I still think that's funny. Anyway, Curiosity Stream has thousands of streamable documentaries and nonfiction, award-winning exclusive TV shows on
It's good
topics
stuff. I
like
watch it.
history, nature, science, food, technology, travel, and more. With more than 35 collections of curated programs handpicked by their experts, streamed to any device, anytime. I recommend the series American Icons to start off with. Try it out by visiting the link on the screen and in the description of this video. Use code MrBeat to sign up and get it for just $14.99 for the whole year. Thanks to Curiosity Stream for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's do this. Here are all the big differences between the 2.
Temperature.
Alaska is bigger, 89 times bigger. Alaska is by far the biggest state in the country, and I think most folks really don't realize just how big it is.
Yeah, and part of that's because of the way that maps work. It looks smaller on a globe or on a map than it really is. It takes up a good chunk of the western United States if you overlaid it.
You could fit
you
almost 4 Californias into Alaska, and it's more than twice as big as Texas. While Alaska borders Canada, Hawaii is the only U.S. state not actually connected to North America. It's part of a bigger region of more than 1,000 islands known as Polynesia. Hawaii is the only island state and only state in the tropics. Hawaii,
Which is funny because we have a state that has island in the name, but isn't. Rhode Island.
has more people and 1 more electoral vote. The population density.
And so for folks who aren't familiar with this, or maybe you're not Americans, the way our electoral votes work is it is a combination of the number of people you have in the House of Representatives and the number of people you have in the Senate. So the minimum number of electoral votes you can possibly have is 3. And that's typically for a state like some of the smaller ones, like Wyoming, for example, who only have 1 member of Congress, 1 person in the U.S. House of Representatives that represents the entire state at large because their population's that low. And then every 10 years we adjust that. So like I live in Ohio. When I was born, I think we had 23 electoral votes. And I want to say we're going to be down to like 18 now after this most recent census. Every 10 years after the census, they reapportion. We always have 435 House of Representatives, congressmen and women, and then 100 senators.
Is of course much higher in Hawaii. Alaska is easily the most sparsely populated state in the country. Both states are in different time zones. Well, a portion of the Aleutian Islands share the same time zone as Hawaii. While both do have a big variety of climate zones, the climate of both states overall is very different. Alaska has a reputation as this very cold place all the time, but parts of it get quite warm during the summer. In the far north, yes, it's cold all year long. That's the tundra, where the polar bears chill out. Most of the state has a continental climate and subarctic climate. In these areas, of course, it gets ridiculously cold during the winter, but summers are usually nice.
And both states are absolutely beautiful. It depends on what you like. If you're into the mountains and that whole thing, then Alaska's the way to go. I mean, Alaska is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Montana's beautiful. Northern California, like around Lake Tahoe, is gorgeous. So, places like that. Colorado is beautiful, of course. Hawaii is a different kind of beautiful. It's the more tropic thing. So if you're into the beach and the warm climate and that kind of stuff, you might like that.
Oh, but they have that permafrost to worry about. Fairbanks, Alaska is a great example to demonstrate the wide range of temperatures. The lowest recorded temperature there is negative 65.9 degrees Fahrenheit, but the highest recorded temperature there is 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't get me wrong, it gets pretty freaking cold in Alaska, but folks also forget that the temperature is moderated along the coasts, especially down by Juneau in southeast Alaska, where it rarely gets that cold in the winter compared to, I don't know, Minnesota.
And Juneau's the capital, and it's actually a really small town that is kind of difficult to get to because I think it's like it's on an island, and there's all these bridges that go to it and stuff like that. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's Juneau. There's the Alaska state capital right there. So I'll kind of back out a little bit and show you what I mean about how. So you got this one bridge that kind of comes in there. You got a few, like a highway that comes in from the north, but it's a pretty inaccessible area for the most part. I'm not entirely sure why, of all places, they put the capital there. It would make a lot more sense to put it in Anchorage, which is where almost all the people live, but they didn't do that. So let's see how long it would take to drive just from Anchorage to Juneau. So your most populous spot, 19 hours and 58 minutes to drive there. It's a 20-hour drive. It's 849 miles, or an hour and 35-minute flight to get from where half the people of the state live to where their capital is. And so I'll show you where I was. I was over in Bethel, which is right here. And you can't even, I don't think you can even drive there. Maybe you can, and I don't know it. But I'm fairly certain that you cannot drive to Bethel from Anchorage. Yeah, you can only fly there. And that's what I did. And I was on a plane that was more like a bus with wings. It didn't have seats in the traditional sense. It had benches, kind of like a school bus does, and one that went all the way across the back of the plane. And it was weird, but it was such a beautiful flight. And we could see Denali, which used to be called Mount McKinley. It's the highest point in North America as we were flying. So that was pretty cool.
Also, being at such a high latitude, the summer days are long in Alaska, but the fall and winter days are short. Hawaii is known as a tropical paradise with generally perfect weather, but did you know that it has 10 different climate zones? It has a tundra climate, too. Say what? Oh, you know it. Well, at its really high elevations. But yeah, Hawaii also has subpolar, oceanic, humid subtropical, cold summer Mediterranean, warm summer Mediterranean, hot semi-arid, savanna, monsoon, and rainforest.
So this is Kauai right here, what I was talking about, how in the center of the island, where nobody lives, there's like this very wet area, but then out on the coast, it's not like that at all. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's go over to Kauai for just a second. You can kind of see how, you can even, there we go, see Hawaii at first here. So these are the main kind of islands that are actually inhabited. And so when you fly into Kauai, you fly into the Lihue airport right there. And you can see how there's basically just one road that goes along the coast and one road that goes along the coast here and drives to about right here. You have this beautiful area here called the Nepali coast. Which is just amazing and some of the most beautiful. But you can see it's all mountains, and there's just nothing in the center at all. But here's where they filmed Jurassic Park right there. It's a really neat place to go.
Whew. But yeah, the local wind patterns are all crazy due to the varied landforms on the islands. The vast majority of Alaska is wilderness. Almost 96% of Alaskan land is public. Just 19% of Hawaii is public land.
And that's true in a lot of western states as well. Not to that degree, not 96%, but big chunks of a lot of the states out west, Nevada, and places like that are owned by the government.
Land. Alaska is only 51 miles or 82 kilometers from Russia at the most narrow point of the Bering Strait. Yep, just that narrow strip of water separates the United States and Russia, believe it or not. Oh, it used to be connected. Several thousand years ago, when the Earth was covered with much, much more ice, it was the Bering Land Bridge, and it's likely that the earliest humans who migrated to the Americas crossed it. Hey,
so what's crazy about that when you think about it is that the United States is closer to Russia than it is to almost any state or any country in the world. With the exception of Canada and Mexico, Russia is one of our closest neighbors in terms of geography, which is crazy to me.
Let's go through some history, shall we? Hawaii's earliest settlers were Polynesian voyagers, arriving there more than 1,000 years before European explorers ever got there. And thousands of years before that, indigenous peoples lived all over what is now Alaska. Europeans first came across the area in the 1700s, maybe even before that. It was those Russians. One famous Russian expedition was led by a Danish dude named Vitus Bering. Oh, hey, Bering. Yep, the Bering Strait was named after him. After his expedition, Russian hunters were regularly making trips to Alaska to make some money, and many stayed out there. In 1784, Grigory Shelikov established the first permanent Russian colony in Alaska on Kodiak Island. Meanwhile, in 1778, the British explorer James Cook was the first
Captain
European to reach Hawaii, although the Spanish possibly stopped by 200 years before and didn't document it. Anyway, James Cook called them the Sandwich Islands because that was his favorite food.
It was named after the Earl of Sandwich.
Just kidding. He named them to honor his sponsor, John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich. The English recorded the native name for the islands as Hawaii. Cook visited Hawaii twice and afterward published several books about his voyages, which attracted further European visitors, mostly folks who wanted to make money, of course. For the rest of the 1700s, Spain sent expeditions to Alaska to try to stake claims all over the Pacific Northwest. However, the Russian-American Company was more successful at colonizing Alaska in the first part of the 1800s. The Russians were
What a name, the Russian-American Company. I love that.
Successful at colonizing Alaska in the first part of the 1800s. The Russians were probably less harsh to the natives than most European groups, but sadly many indigenous peoples died from diseases the Russians brought over due to not being immune to them.
It's the same kind of thing as what happened with Native Americans in what is now the United States. People are exposed to diseases that they've never been exposed to before. They don't have generations of herd immunity that has developed against those diseases, and it very quickly attacks them and kills many of them off.
Many indigenous peoples also sadly died from diseases they weren't immune to from Europeans who came to Hawaii. In 1795, the warrior chief Kamehameha the Great, who led the independent island of Hawaii, conquered the other independent islands of Oahu, Maui, Molokai, and Lanai, and unified them under one government, beginning the Kingdom of Hawaii.
And you go there today and you'll see statues of him in different places. It's really neat to kind of see that part of their history. And one of the things that's crazy when you go to Hawaii is that you'll notice that, at least my impression was, that the majority of tourists who were there were Japanese. Even at Pearl Harbor, there were more Japanese people visiting Pearl Harbor than there were folks who look like me. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but one is geography. Japan's as close to Hawaii as large chunks of the United States population is. There was a Japanese wedding going on in our hotel while we were there. So it's kind of just helps you realize just how remote Hawaii is and how they're kind of that bridge kind of between North America and Asia.
In 1820, American Protestant missionaries began arriving, trying to all westernize the islands and stuff. 5 years later, King Kamehameha III took over and ended up being the longest reigning monarch in the kingdom's history, eventually helping it transfer from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. By 1840, Britain, France, and the United States were all regularly interacting with the Kingdom of Hawaii, trying to influence it. To fight off the influence of Britain and France, King Kamehameha III signed a treaty with the United States that placed Hawaii under its protection. More and more Americans came.
And you know what happens once you're placed under our protection? Well, now we got to put a naval base there. Now we got to put some troops there, that kind of thing. And you can see where this is going.
Came out there to set up plantations to grow sugar. Many immigrants from Japan, China, and the Philippines also eventually came to work at those plantations. In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million. Just happy to get rid of it. I have a whole video about that.
It was called Seward's Folly because Secretary of State William Seward is the one who orchestrated that purchase. And at the time, everybody thought it was stupid. It was a big block of ice that the U.S. spent all that money on, but then they found gold, and suddenly it became a really, really good idea.
Here, maybe check it out and stuff. Most people made fun of the American who made the deal, William Seward, saying, "What good is that icebox?" In the following decades, the United States...
Wait, did he literally... I said icebox, didn't I? He literally used the same word I did, and that just kind of came off the top of my head. All right, you got to take 2 shots for that one. Okay.
Didn't do much with Alaska, but at least they owned it. In 1887, the Kingdom of Hawaii granted the United States permission to build a naval base at Pearl Harbor. And then private businessmen overthrew Queen Leokalani after years of reducing the monarchy's power.
Yeah, so these businessmen, it's like the Dole Company, for example. It's bananas is kind of one of the main crops. And these businessmen saw dollar signs, and they saw the opportunity that would come with Hawaii eventually joining the United States. And so it starts with independence, overthrowing the Queen, but then attaching itself and getting annexed by the United States, which I think happened as part of that whole colonialism thing with the Spanish-American War, getting the Philippines, getting Puerto Rico. We gobble up Hawaii at about that same time.
And straight up ended the Kingdom of Hawaii, establishing Hawaii as a republic in 1893. A few years later, the United States annexed Hawaii, and it became a U.S. territory in 1900. By that time, gold had been discovered in Alaska, which brought thousands of settlers up there trying to strike it rich. Because of this, Alaska became a U.S. territory in 1912. During the first half of the 1900s, more and more Americans began moving to both Alaska and Hawaii. During World War II, Hawaii's importance as a military outpost became critical when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.
And Japan also, I believe at one point, conquered at least a couple of the Aleutian Islands, and so there was at least some Japanese presence on American territory.
That attack led to the United States declaring war on Japan and thus entering the entire war. The next year, Japan occupied 2 of the outer Aleutian islands of Alaska, Kiska and the aforementioned Attu, where a brutal 2-week-long battle took place in which hardly any Japanese surrendered. Because of World War II, the United States built several military bases in Alaska, which further helped the territory grow. By the 1950s, both had enough people to become states, and both became states in 1959, although Alaska joined the Union first.
And we haven't added a new state since. There's been talk a little bit here and there about Puerto Rico, about the District of Columbia, but the political situation is such that I just don't see it happening anytime soon, because a lot like what was happening in the years leading up to the American Civil War, where you had this balance of power issue. And so every time a free state would be admitted to the Union, they'd add a slave state to kind of keep that balance. I think that probably the same thing would happen now, because in every one of those situations, you would have the Democrats and Republicans looking at the political makeup of that territory, say the District of Columbia. Republicans are going to look at that and say, D.C. is almost all Democrats. That would be 2, no doubt, guaranteed new Democrat senators if it was admitted to the Union, and a Democratic congressperson. And so the Republicans are going to oppose that to no end. And the same thing would be true if, say, people in Northern California wanted to break off and form their own state. The Democrats would say, heck no, because that's 2 free Republican senators. And so same kind of thing would be happening in modern times when it comes to admitting new states.
Also, in the 1950s, the plantation owners finally lost power as the descendants of immigrant laborers who were now U.S. citizens voted against them. This dramatically changed Hawaiian politics afterward. In 1968, the discovery of oil at Prudhoe Bay, and then later the completion of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in 1977, led to an oil boom in Alaska. Today, mostly because of that oil, Alaska residents pay way less taxes than Hawaii overall.
And they get dividend checks from that. I don't know exactly how much it is. I think the last time I talked to my brother about it, it was like $1,700 a year. They get money from the state as their share of the profits from the oil.
In fact, Alaskans pay less taxes than residents of all other states. They even get money back from the government. Yep. Funded by the state's oil revenue, every year citizens get a payout via the Alaska Permanent Fund. It has paid out an average of around $1,600 each year to every resident since it began in the 1970s. Also, Alaska doesn't have an income tax. Hawaii does, as well as a much higher sales tax. Still, the median household income is higher in Hawaii. Also, the poverty rate is lower there. However, the minimum wage is currently slightly higher in Alaska.
But that poverty rate's not bad for either one compared to most of the country.
The median age is higher in Hawaii. More Hawaii residents have college degrees. Hawaii is more ethnically diverse. The largest ethnic group there is Asian American, which makes up about 37% of its population.
Makes sense.
The second largest ethnic group is European American, followed by Hispanic and Native Hawaiian. Alaska's largest minority ethnic group is Native Alaskans. 1 in 5 Alaska residents identify as either American Indian or Alaska Native.
That's actually really impressive. I didn't think it would be that high, but that's very cool.
This is the highest percentage of any state. Politically speaking, Alaska is generally more conservative, or more accurately, more libertarian. Hawaii residents generally tend to be pretty loyal to the Democratic Party. They haven't elected a Republican for president since Ronald Reagan in 1984. Meanwhile, Alaska residents...
And that election in 1984, pretty much everybody went for Ronald Reagan. The Democratic nominee was former Vice President Walter Mondale. I think he won Minnesota, his home state, and that might be about it. Let me take a look. Yeah, so here you go. D.C. and Minnesota, and that was it. Minnesota was his home state, Walter Mondale. 525 electoral votes for Ronald Reagan, 13 for Walter Mondale. I would be shocked if, again in my lifetime, we ever see anything like that. Just nuts. 54 million to 37 million. I mean, that is an absolute landslide. It's the highest total ever received by a presidential candidate. Mondale's 13 electoral votes is also the second fewest ever for a second place, second only to Alf Landon's 8 in 1936. But there were, I think, fewer electoral votes to go around in 1936. So that's crazy.
Residents have only voted for a Democrat for president once, for Lyndon Johnson, way back in 1964. Alaska has had a couple of independent governors since it became a state. Major industries in Hawaii include tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare. Major industries in Alaska also include tourism, but additionally petroleum, fishing, and mining. Alaska is experiencing higher job growth, and Hawaii's economy was hit harder by the current COVID-19 pandemic.
So the job growth thing, I know when my brother moved to Alaska, the hospital where his wife was working was desperate for workers. Like, they had hundreds of openings, and they were like, they paid all their their moving expenses to move there. That's how badly they needed someone to work in nursing at this hospital system. They had all these jobs that paid really, really well, but they were having a hard time getting enough workers.
Alaska has more national parks. Alaska has way more wilderness. While both have beaches, believe it or not, Hawaiian beaches are some of the best in the world. Due to the influence of its unique mix of Hawaiian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, and North American cultures, Hawaii's culture is one of the most distinct cultures in the world. I mean, just by a sampling of Hawaiian food, you quickly learn that. Oh, and I just gotta mention Spam. Not that kind of Spam. Yeah, that kind of Spam.
But I don't like Spam! Sorry, it's a Monty Python thing. If you know, you know.
Per capita, more Hawaiians eat Spam than any other area of the world other than Guam.
What's wrong with you, Hawaii?
American soldiers brought it with them to Hawaii as part of their rations, but it became an important source of protein for Hawaiians after fishing was prohibited during World War II. The main two ways to get to Alaska and around in Alaska are by plane and boat. Only one highway, which is really just a glorified road in some places, makes it all the way up there from the contiguous United States through Canada, the Alaska Highway, which, fun fact, I've been on. There's not even a road that leads to Juneau, Alaska's capital. Surfing, of course, remains a huge part of Hawaiian culture as well. In fact, the ancient Polynesians were the first known humans who surfed.
Cool.
Alaska has Denali, the tallest peak in North America. Oh, and the North Pole is actually there. And there's a post office in Hawaii where you can mail a coconut. I mean, like, without putting it in a box.
And that's interesting because Hawaii's really particular about what they let in and out of their state because they're isolated, because they're not connected to anywhere else. They don't want things being introduced that aren't native to that area, such as wildlife or plants and things like that, or even insects. So there's all these signs when you go to the airport telling you what you are and are not allowed to bring in.
Just the coconut. Look, there is so much more I could get into, but I grow weary for now, so just know that I shall come back to these two magical places for future videos, because they are indeed two of the most epic states of all of these United States.
Agree. Totally agree. Love both those states for different reasons. Loved my time in both of them. I will probably be back in both of them at some point. So thanks again to Matt, Mr. Beat, for his great content. I hope you guys will check him out. He has a lot of these comparison videos. He's got a lot of great history videos. Just a really good variety. And trust me when I say he's a good dude. He's a nice guy. He and I don't see eye to eye on everything, but that's what makes it fun. I respect him because I know that he knows what he's talking about, and he is not coming at those things without being educated on them, and I can respect that. You don't have to agree with me as long as you know what you're talking about. So check him out, and if you have enjoyed this video, please hit like and let me know something you learned in this video that you did not know before today. Thanks for watching.